I was 22 when I moved to Chicago for college. I was young, excited, and completely broke. The only way I could afford living in the city was by finding a roommate through Craigslist. That's how I met Daniel. Daniel was quiet, polite, maybe a little odd, but nothing that set off alarms. He had short brown hair, glasses, and worked night shifts at a warehouse. The arrangement was perfect. He'd be gone most nights, and I'd have the apartment to myself. Rent was cheap, the location wasn't terrible, and for a while, everything was normal. But then little things started happening. I come home from class and noticed my closet door slightly open when I knew I had shut it. My notebooks would be out of place. Once, I woke up and saw my desk chair turned to face my bed. I brushed it off as me being careless, until the night I woke up at 3 a.m. The sound was faint but clear, footsteps in the living room. I froze. Daniel wasn't supposed to be home. He had a night shift. Slowly, I sat up and listened. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the apartment. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I finally convinced myself it must have been the upstairs neighbors. But when I checked the next morning, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the kitchen table was a plate of half-eaten food. But it wasn't mine, and Daniel hadn't come home. The next time I saw him, I casually asked if he had come home that night. He shook his head. No, I worked until 6 in the morning. I didn't tell him about the footsteps or the plate. Something in his flat, expressionless face told me not to. Over the next few weeks, the incidents escalated. My bedroom door, which I always locked before sleeping, would be unlocked in the morning. I'd hear soft humming late at night, but when I stepped out to check, the apartment would be silent. And once, I found a single Polaroid photo slipped under my door. It was a picture of me, sleeping. I confronted Daniel about it, but he just stared at me blankly and said, "Why would I take pictures of you?" That night, I barely slept. I pushed my dresser against the door, but even then I kept jolting awake, convinced someone was standing outside one weekend. Daniel told me he was going out of town to visit family. I finally had the apartment to myself. Relief washed over me, but that relief didn't last. I was cleaning the living room when I noticed something strange. The vent cover near the floor was slightly loose. Curious, I pulled it open. Inside, I found a small box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several Polaroids of me sleeping, taken from different nights, a lock of my hair, one of my missing socks, and worst of all, a journal. The entries were disturbing. Page after page described me in unsettling detail. What I wore, when I showered, how I looked while brushing my teeth. The most recent entry stopped my breath cold. She suspects something. I have to move faster. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? That my roommate was creepy? That he wrote about me in his journal? I decided I would pack my things the next morning and leave. But I didn't make it to morning. At around 2:45 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning. Slowly, gently, testing the lock. I froze. My dresser was still against the door. Then came the whisper, from the other side of the door, in a low, breathy voice. "Let me in." My blood turned to ice. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The whisper came again, louder this time. I said, "Let me in." Suddenly, the door shook violently. He was pushing, slamming, trying to break it down. The dresser rattled with each impact. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher what was happening. For 2 minutes straight, Daniel screamed and pounded at my door. Then silence. When the police arrived, the apartment was empty. Daniel was gone. They searched his room. What they found still haunts me. Behind his closet wall, hidden under a loose panel, was a crawl space. Inside were more journals, dozens of them. Each one described different women he had lived with over the years. The details were obsessive. Times they showered, when they were home alone, what they looked like when they cried. And in several entries, the words, "They always leave before I get the chance." Daniel never came back. The police said he vanished, like he knew they were coming for him. His ID, his job records, everything turned out to be fake. Nobody could even confirm if Daniel was his real name. To this day, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night convinced I hear footsteps in my apartment. Sometimes I find things slightly moved. And once, just once, I swear I found a Polaroid slipped under my door. But when I blinked, it was gone. When I was 19, I moved out of my parents' house for the first time. Money was tight, so I jumped on the cheapest rental I could find, a rundown one-bedroom in a forgotten corner of a small Midwestern town. The street was quiet, too quiet. All the houses were old, their paint peeling, the yards overgrown. My landlord, Mr. Kent, gave me the keys in silence and walked away without a word after I signed the lease. Something about him felt off, but I ignored it. I wanted freedom, independence. I didn't care how ugly the place looked. But from my very first night there, things felt wrong. When I lay down in bed, I could hear faint scratching in the walls. Not like rats, too deliberate. Slow, careful, almost like fingernails. I told myself it was just an old house. They all make noises, right? But then I started noticing the scratches weren't random. They had a rhythm, a steady, deliberate scraping sound, always coming from the same spot, right above my bed. One night, I pressed my ear against the wall. My blood ran cold. The scratching stopped. Then, clear as day, I heard breathing. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked outside. That wall backed up to nothing but a thin strip of land and a rusted fence. No neighbors. No animals could have gotten in. I told myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. About 2 weeks later, I discovered something I hadn't noticed before. At the end of the hallway, behind a layer of faded wallpaper, was a door frame. The wallpaper had been carefully glued over it, as if someone wanted it hidden. I peeled it back with shaking fingers. A locked door stood there. I called the landlord asking about it. His answer made my stomach churn. "Don't go in there. That room isn't part of your lease." When I pushed, demanding to know why, he snapped, "Some doors are better left closed." And then he hung up. That night, I couldn't resist. I searched the kitchen drawers and, unbelievably, found an old, rusted key taped under the sink. My hands trembled as I slid it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room. The stench hit me immediately. Rot, mold, something far worse. Inside, the walls were covered in scratch marks. Deep gouges, like someone had clawed at them for years. On the floor was a mattress so stained I couldn't tell what color it had once been. And on top of it lay a small, leather-bound journal. I opened it. The entries were written in shaky handwriting, each more disturbing than the last. "He watches me from the walls. The scratching never stops. They put me in here and locked the door. They said no one would hear me, but he hears me." The final entry was just 3 words, scrawled violently over and over until the page tore. "Don't look up." I stumbled back, dropping the journal. Every hair on my body stood on end. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate scratching sound. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the ceiling. I forced myself to look up. In the corner of the ceiling, half hidden in shadow, was a small vent. And behind the slats, 2 pale eyes staring directly at me. I screamed and ran, slamming the door shut. My hands shook so violently I could barely lock it. The scratching grew louder, faster. The thing behind the wall was frantic now, like it knew I had seen it. That entire night, I sat with my back against the far wall, clutching a kitchen knife, listening as something crawled inside the walls of my house. The next morning, I packed my things and ran. I didn't care about the deposit, didn't care if I looked insane. I left everything behind and drove 3 hours to a friend's house. When I finally gathered the courage to call the landlord, someone else answered his phone. A police officer. Mr. Kent had been found dead in his own home that morning. He'd hung himself, On the wall beside his body, scratched deep into the plaster, were the words, "He won't stay locked forever." I tried to move on. I never went back for my things. I never asked about the house again. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is silent, I swear I can still hear it. That same steady scratching sound, right above my bed. It was the summer of 2014. I was driving back from a friend's wedding in upstate New York, taking a lonely stretch of highway just past midnight. The road was empty, the forest thick on either side, my headlights cutting through endless darkness. About 20 minutes into the drive, I saw something that made me hit the brakes. A young woman stood at the edge of the road, her pale arm raised, thumb out. She couldn't have been older than 22. Long black hair, wearing a faded white dress. She looked lost, almost frightened. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. When she slid into the passenger seat, the air turned ice cold. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Thank you." Nobody else would stop. She introduced herself as Lena. She said her car had broken down a few miles back, and she needed a ride home. She lived on Willow Creek Road, a few towns over. As we drove, I noticed strange things about her. She didn't look at me, just stared out the window. Her hands trembled in her lap, and every time my headlights passed a reflective road sign, her eyes seemed wrong, too dark. Still, I tried making small talk. "So, where were you headed tonight?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Nowhere you'd want to go." I laughed nervously, hoping she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. The longer she sat beside me, the heavier the air felt. I kept catching whiffs of something foul, like wet earth and decay. I glanced at her, and for a second, I could swear her dress was damp. About 20 minutes later, she turned to me suddenly. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. "Take the next left." The road she pointed to was nothing but a narrow dirt path swallowed by trees. No lights, no signs, just darkness. My gut screamed no. "I think I'll stay on the main road," I said carefully. Her voice sharpened. I said take the next left. I kept driving straight, pretending not to hear her. When I finally gathered the courage to glance at the passenger seat, she was gone. The seatbelt still buckled. The door never opened, but she was simply gone. My car reeked of rot. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I sped down the highway. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station. The clerk looked at me like I was insane. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." When I told him what happened, his face went pale. "You said Willow Creek Road?" I nodded. He swallowed hard. "Man." For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her pale face staring at me in the dark. I tried convincing myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the mind. But 2 months later, while cleaning my car, I found something under the passenger seat. A muddy, waterlogged photograph. It showed a young woman in a white dress, smiling, alive. On the back, written in smeared ink, were the words, "Thanks for the ride."